Hello again, GAP students. I hope you found the last video helpful. Here's the next one. I'm afraid it's a bit rushed, and so please forgive me if there's anything I say that does not quite make sense. Remember, they're all online, all the videos, so you can look at them later if you don't quite get it the first time in class. So a lot of my work with therapy is clients who are struggling with trauma, with depression, and with low self-esteem. This is very common, and it's common throughout the world. So I thought it might be helpful for you to know a little bit more about those things, which is trauma, depression, and low self-esteem. Before I get on to the main presentation, here are some of your questions that seem to be somewhat related to that subject. Can I boost the courage to be myself in life? The answer, of course, is yes, but you have to work on it. And some of the things I've suggested about anxiety and some of the things I'll suggest practical solutions or practical things you can do to help you feel better can boost your courage. But the main thing you always want to be is to be yourself, to be the person you are and not somebody who you aren't. Next question. Why does love give people mental issues, example, trauma or depression? In some sense, you could say we are most damaged by a relationship, whether it's early on in our life with our parents or our family, or later when we're in school, or later when we have a loving relationship that goes wrong. And these can all be very traumatic, particularly if things have not gone well when you're very young. So in some sense, we are damaged through bad relationships. And the only way we can heal is through good relationships. So therapy is about a good relationship, or a good partner, a good marriage is a good relationship, or your friends, or sometimes people in your family who really understand you. And so we can heal through love those things which have been damaged. How can I boost my self-confidence? That's a long-term project where you keep trying. And I think I said in the last one that when I was in a new situation, I pretended, if you like, I was more confident than I was. And that really helped. So that's one of the things you can do when you're in a new situation. You can think of yourself as, I'm not exactly me. I'm this person I would like to be. And so that can help you with your self-confidence. And as you get more successful with things, your self-confidence will naturally grow. Another question, what can I do when I'm upset? Well, I've talked a bit about that with the anxiety practices. But when you're upset, it's actually okay to be upset as long as it doesn't go on for too long. All of us get upset. What we want to do is kind of like bad weather. The storm comes, we're really upset, then we calm down, maybe we get upset again and we calm down, and eventually it kind of calms down and it's in the past and we don't think about it too much. Next question, how do you cope with depression and mental issues? Well, that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. Who is the right person to share things that trouble my heart? I've said this a little bit before, but it's always someone who listens well and does not try to force you to do things or gives you too much advice which doesn't suit who you are. This is a more general question, which is kind of associated with low self-esteem. What should I do when people bring on negative energy and try to pull me down? Well, that's often about a family or other people who are critical and judging. Those kind of things tend to make us feel bad, as though we're being attacked. And often we take in what people say and we go round and round in our head trying to understand what they mean and trying to decide whether it's true or not. And that can really make us feel badly about ourselves. So when you have people who are negative, the best thing is to avoid them, if at all possible. And if you can't avoid them because they're in your family or they're close to you, then you need to really steel yourself and kind of defend yourself and maybe just really put down a kind of shield that says, okay, whatever they're saying, that's because they're a negative person. What they're saying about me is not really about me, it's about them. So I know that many of you have had very difficult things happen to you in your life. I'm not exactly sure what those are, but you will know what they are. And maybe you've done your best to overcome these difficulties, but it's not been easy. Bad things can damage our self-esteem and lead to depression. And we all have bouts of depression now and then. But when it lasts for more than a few weeks and it keeps on going, then we know that there's a real difficulty there. Now, those bad things which happen to you are not your fault. They're not a reason to feel guilty or ashamed. But you still have to find a way to help yourself, even though it's not your fault. And you've got to move forward in your life, regardless of what has happened to you. All of these feelings, feeling sad, feeling anxious, feeling badly about yourself, are completely normal as long as they don't get stuck and burden your life so you don't get on with things and do what you want to do and do what you need to do. So I'm going to give some practical suggestions at the end, but some of them are very similar, as I said, to the anxiety relief techniques in the last video. I'm going to talk about trauma, depression, and low self-esteem. And hopefully these are going to be helpful and you're going to understand a little bit more about yourself and your reactions. So what is trauma? Trauma is an event or series of events, sometimes it's an ongoing situation, that are overwhelming to you as a person. It can be all sorts of different things, and it's different for each person, although generally the kind of things which are traumatic are these ones which I'm going to say. The first is the loss of an important person. And of course, the loss of a parent when you're young can be devastating to a child because the parent is so important and so necessary for the child to feel safe and to feel as though they're going to be taken care of. So loss of an important person is basically the most important thing. And if it does happen to you, you will have a little bit more of a tendency to become depressed later in life. The next, of course, is rape and sexual abuse, particularly sexual abuse of children. This can lead to all sorts of difficulties later in life, and it's one of the things which I deal with a lot in my work. I know that in Zambia, sexual abuse and rape are very common. So I don't know if any of you have experienced those kind of things, but they are definitely traumatic, and you will have to probably get some help at some point to work through those issues. The next thing is physical beatings or physical abuse. And that also includes emotional abuse because they usually go together. When somebody is violent and nasty, they usually say nasty things at the same time. Of course, there can be emotional abuse without physical beatings. And that's when somebody is highly critical, very judgmental, and says very nasty things about maybe the way you look or the way you are, that you can never do anything right. And those things, particularly when they go on for a long time, are very traumatic. Poverty and lack of basic amenities. What does that mean? It means not having what you need, not having safety, not having a place to live, not having the food that you need, not having the water that you can wash and take care of yourself. That, when it goes on for long periods, can be very traumatic and kind of wear you down. Similarly, if you have a life-threatening illness or a disability that goes on for a long period of time, that can be traumatic for the whole family because they don't know who is going to survive or not. And if you have somebody in your family who has some sort of illness or disability, that can actually be traumatic for you as a sibling, particularly if they're your brother or sister. And of course, there's natural disasters. There's things like hurricanes or floods, or even things like extreme heat weather. So those are the things which generally are traumatic. So what makes an event traumatic to a person? Because the same event may actually be handled quite differently by one person than another. For some person it might be traumatic, and for another person it might be very difficult, but it won't necessarily damage them in any way. The first factor that makes it traumatic is vulnerability. So the younger you are as a child, when bad things happen, the more likely it is to be damaging. the harder it is for you to get over those things. And that includes feeling powerless, not able to do anything about it. In natural disasters, that's one of the main things, is powerless to change the situation because things feel so out of control. Being disabled, having sensitivities, having illnesses, these can also cause quite extreme vulnerability. So vulnerability is a main group, which means that that person is more likely to become traumatized when something happens. Then there's the event or series of events, and these overwhelm that person's coping ability. Now, I've actually worked with people who've had what you might think of as not very difficult situations, but because they overwhelmed them as a person, because they were sensitive and vulnerable, they actually were badly affected by an event where somebody else might not have been affected. The most important thing I think about trauma is there's a lack of a healing environment. When we feel overwhelmed, when we feel sad, when we feel anxious, when we feel we can't cope, we need somebody to be there. We need a person to hold us, to hug us if we're a child. We need a person to listen. We need a person to help us feel safe, to help us move through things. It's very natural when a child is hurt for them to run to a parent or somebody who's safe and to want to be held. And they will cry and they will complain about whatever's happened. And that trauma will basically kind of dissipate. But for most of us, we did not have that kind of healing environment. And therefore, the trauma gets stuck. It stays in our body, it stays in our personality, and we have a struggle with it all the time. What are the results of trauma? Well, this is called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And how does that show up for a person? It shows up as these bad memories, intrusive memories of the event or situation. So you think about them and think about them, and they go round and round in your head, and you feel as though you can't get rid of those negative thoughts and you can't get beyond them. This particularly happens when it's been some sort of abuse, like a sexual abuse or some sort of physical abuse, that the person will keep remembering those events, or they will turn up in dreams. Or if they're in a situation that's very similar to the event, they will get very, very scared and often retreat. So that causes a person to avoid thinking certain thoughts or imagining certain things and getting very upset with their dreams, particularly if they're nightmares, because these memories will tend to come back in the dreams. And that person will want to avoid situations or people that remind them of the negative thing. I've had this fairly recently where somebody was sexually abused by somebody in their family and they just cannot be near them. They start to feel physically sick and they just can't stand to be in the same room. Also, a result of trauma is negative thoughts. Negative thoughts about yourself, and we'll talk about those more when we're talking about depression. And the sense that something has gone wrong or you've done something wrong. So guilt and shame are very common when you've had a trauma. Somehow a child blames themselves for the bad things that happened. And that's not fair and it's not right. But it does tend to just bring that person into a state of low self-esteem. They're not feeling good about themselves. They often have some sort of idea that they should have done something different. But of course, that wasn't possible because they were a child, maybe, or the situation was outside of their control. But guilt and shame and negative thoughts are very common after trauma. And the last thing is that nervous system gets very reactive. That means a person feels jumpy. They feel on edge. They're always watching to see if bad things are going to happen. They're kind of reactive, so easily startled. So if there's a noise, they jump. And often that leads to sleep problems, not sleeping deeply, waking up in the middle of the night. And those are the main results of traumatic experiences. So let's go on to depression, because depression is almost always associated with trauma, but it can be associated with loss, it can be associated with other things in your life. And what is depression? Well, depression isn't just having a bad mood or crying because you're sad or because you're watching a sad movie. But it's persistent sadness. That means it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. And you find yourself crying, or you find yourself in this low, kind of depressed mood that nothing really is important, nothing feels interesting. So that sadness, it kind of weighs down of you like a weight sitting on your shoulders. And with it comes these feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and feeling dispirited. Like, what's the point? I can't do anything about this. I don't know what to do. I just feel totally helpless. And this is too much for me to deal with. And that includes these negative thoughts. First, there's negative thoughts about yourself, the negative thoughts about the world, and negative thoughts about the future. There's three kinds of negative thoughts. So as I've been saying, feeling hopeless and helpless goes with these thoughts. I'm worthless. I'm no use. I can't do anything. Nobody loves me. I'm never going to get on with my life. That's a very negative thought. And you have to, if you're working with depression, you have to recognize those thoughts and counteract them with positive thoughts, which I'll talk about later. Also have negative thoughts about the world and other people. Everything is bad. Everything is pointless. The world is just going downhill. Nobody will care about anything. The environment is getting worse. There's going to be global warming. And that sense that everything is getting worse and worse. And that people are not caring. And people don't care about you. So those are negative thoughts about the world. And they can take all sorts of shape. But basically there's a sense that things are really bad and there's nothing I can do about it. And the most common negative thought that kind of makes everything stick is there's no hope for me. The future is bleak. I'm never going to get out of this. It's never going to change. And that negative thought tends to lock in all the other negative thoughts. So that's the most important thing to deal with if you're feeling dispirited or you're feeling hopeless, which is that, hold on, there always is another opportunity. Things change. I need to hold on to hope. Even if I don't know what to hope for, something will get better. So when you have those negative thoughts about the future, it's really important to kind of counteract them in your own mind. Another symptom or sign of depression is you either sleep too much, and that means you feel very tired, very exhausted, you can't get your energy moving, and or you wake up in the night, typically around about 2 or 3, and then you can't get back to sleep. So your sleep is broken. And when you wake up, you often have some of these negative thoughts going on in your mind, and they're very hard to deal with. Another sign is something to do with your appetite. So often people will eat too much in order to feel better about themselves and eat things which aren't particularly good for them. Just eat whatever. But on the alternative side, there can be a lack of appetite. A person can just not feel like eating at all, that it's not worth even eating, and that food doesn't even taste very good. Substance abuse, alcoholism, using drugs goes with depression very regularly because the person uses those substances to just feel a little bit better for the moment, but they do not help. In fact, they make it worse. And the depression will often get worse and worse if a person is drinking too much alcohol or smoking marijuana or taking other drugs. So let me go on to low self-esteem. I've talked about how trauma can lead to depression, and it can also lead to low self-esteem. What does this mean? Well, you just feel you're not as good as other people. You tend to judge yourself harshly, criticize yourself, have these negative thoughts in your mind, just as we were talking about depression, and also feeling ashamed, feeling that there's something wrong with you. And often you're actually comparing yourself. Well, that person can do it, so why can't I? There's something wrong with me. And there's always that feeling that somehow you're not good enough or there's something bad inside. And because of that, there's a tendency to avoid social situations, often to avoid making friends. A person gets very isolated when they have low self-esteem. Being more social, making more friends is really one of the best things you can do if you're feeling not very good about yourself. Because good friends will love you anyway, even if you don't actually live up to some strange expectation that you have of yourself. And often with low self-esteem, a person has very unrealistic expectations and is very perfectionist about themselves. They want to be perfect. They want things to be right. And because of low self-esteem, you have difficulty accepting compliments and nice things that are said to you. And often it's hard for you to accept gifts because you don't feel worthy. You don't feel good enough. You don't feel as though they're true. And often in your mind, when somebody says something nice, oh, you look lovely, you say to yourself, well, they're just trying to say that to make me feel better. So you kind of undermine the compliment. And what's really important if you do suffer from that kind of thing is to say to yourself, listen and let the compliment come in and let it be a sense that I feel good about myself. Low self-esteem is often related to worrying about your appearance, worrying about your weight, worrying about how your hair looks, worrying about whether you've got enough muscles. All of these things are that sense that I'm not quite good enough. And you're worrying what others might think about you. And when you've had conversations with people, you often go away thinking, did I say the right thing? And you run the conversation around in your mind and you think, did I say something wrong? Did I talk in the wrong tone of voice? What did they mean about that? So you're kind of second guessing yourself. You're not just letting yourself be who you are. What helps us get better? There's a lot of things that you can do to make yourself better. First of all, the most important thing is very simple. Regular exercise, good food, and sleeping well. You need to sleep well. You need to get to bed on time, and you need probably 7 or 8 hours of sleep every single night. Or if you have a short period of sleep, you need to make up for it a little later. Sleeping is one of the most important things you can do. And exercising has been shown to actually be really good to get through depression. Eating well, eating food which is nutritious and healthy is going to make your body feel better and going to give you more energy. I talked a little bit about having positive thoughts and actions, and I talked about those in terms of affirmations in the last video. When you're thinking those negative thoughts, you have to counteract them. If you think, oh, I'm not good enough, you need to actually say to yourself, hold on a moment. Where did that negative thought come from? Maybe it's something some other person said to me and it's not really true. Maybe it's because I'm being too critical. I need to have a positive thought like, I am good enough and I need to get on with my life. Actions, being active, being creative, making things happen, these are very important. If you can have positive thoughts and positive actions, your spirits will lift. And that includes like going to church, praying, singing, dancing, being social, being with supportive friends and family. Those are all very positive things. If you are finding yourself hiding away, not getting involved with friends and family, you know that you've got to make a big effort and to be more social and to be more involved with good people. So being more social, getting out more, being active, having positive thoughts, those are the things which are most helpful. And of course, I've talked about this a number of times, which is that you need to find somebody to talk to who listens. That could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be somebody in your church. If it's more professional, then it's therapy. It's a therapist or a counselor. Sometimes it's good to find a counselor, maybe associated with some organization, maybe your church, and just take the courage to talk to them. Someone who knows and who listens. But as I say, you have to be careful because some people, they want to change you into who they think you should be, and that is never helpful. So as I've said before, prayer, meditation, and periods of quiet reflection, really thinking about what's going on, knowing that bad things have happened to you in the past, and that those bad things somehow have to kind of resolve and unravel so that you can feel better about yourself. So even facing some of those difficult memories, thinking about them, realizing that you did nothing wrong and that it was never your fault, that could be very helpful. When you're reflecting, to actually just realize that you're a human being like every other human being, that you can't hold yourself to higher standards than somebody else, that you are just the same as everybody. You're good in some ways and not quite so good in other ways, that you can always get better. The last thing I would say, which is helpful, is therapy and medication. There are lots of medications now which can help with depression. There's some of them which are natural, but most of them you have to go to a doctor who'll prescribe them for you. These are called antidepressants. Therapy is finding somebody to talk to who is qualified, who has some training, who knows what they're doing, and who understands how depression works, how trauma works, how low self-esteem works, so that they can help you move slowly but surely into a better sense of yourself. So those are some of the ideas. I know this is a short video and I could certainly go into it a lot more detail, but hopefully it just gives you an overview of what you can do and how you can help yourself. And so that you understand that you, if you're struggling with something, you're like so many other people in this world. And that as human beings, we have this sensitivity. We do get overwhelmed by certain situations. We can't always cope and we can't always expect ourselves to be in a good mood or positive, and that sometimes we will slip, and then we can forgive ourselves and move on. Don't hold on to negativity. Don't hold on to this view of yourself as not good enough. Those are things that are not helpful. So if you want to watch this again, it will be on my website and it will be on YouTube. And you can go over it again and see if there's things which are more useful for you next time you view it. Thank you.